What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Wrestling Junkies Podcast. I'm Mr. Cincinnati, and as always, I am joined by the podcast dad himself, Choops. How are you, my friend?
Oh, you know how I'm doing. I'm not happy today, but football season's over, so we're back to wrestling mode. Hope you're ready to talk wrestling with me, buddy.
I am. I just want you to get a smile on your face. You look like you just lost your elbow.
Okay. That is a
Got him.
We're gonna have a catastrophe tonight because I left Elmo at daycare, so it is. I'm ready to talk some wrestling.
Well, never fear. We have plenty of that ahead. Thank you, as always, to everybody that is joining us tonight. It's a brand new week, and as always, make sure you're following us at Junkies Pod on X for all things Wrestling Junkies Podcast. You'll find all of the links to our socials. Follow us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. Again, like, share, subscribe. Choops, what is that magic number?
It's 1. Even though the two of us look great today.
We do look rather snazzy. But before we get to our merch plugs, make sure you're also following our friends at mainevent_net. Again, great blogs, live podcasts, short form content, anything and everything professional wrestling that you could possibly want. What up, Alejandro? Always good to see you in the chats, my friend. And rest in peace to Elmo. He's not dead yet, but not yet. You'll find him. You'll get him. You'll get him back.
We got a backup. Don't you worry about me. We'll be all right.
And he has that shirt too. Yeah. Mr. OTM, host of the On the Mark podcast, also has this Support Independent Wrestling t-shirt. You guys should do us a favor. Head on over to our merch store, WrestlingJunkiesPod.creator-spring.com. Get yourself a mug, t-shirt, tank, beanie, not hats, but I'm going to save that one for our friends over at Gorilla Press Apparel. Remember, Gorilla Press Apparel. .bigcartel.com. Use promo code WJP2024 for 25% off site wide. I was talking to Will a little bit today, and he's been in the lab working on some new designs. So definitely going to have some cool stuff to sport just in time for the holiday season. So Nick Mysterio is Mr. OTM. Is that basically what you're trying to tell us without telling us?
Either way. So? He's a bad fodder.
Okay. Anyway,
my Finn Balor impression. Thank you. Thank you for reacting. God.
Yeah, not your best. Not your best. That's okay. Before we introduce our guests tonight, just a couple of quick plugs. This Friday, September 20th, the Sensei Aaron Wade presents Dojo Rising at the TWE Arena. It's an action-packed event with an unforgettable night of pro wrestling as some of the toughest competitors rise to the occasion. $15 tickets, so do not miss your chance to witness this epic night live. Bell time is at 8 p.m. Grab those tickets, be part of the action. Tomorrow, I will be dropping a conversation that I had last week with the Sensei about Dojo Rising. Cannot wait to share that with all of you. And don't forget, Marcus Mathers, All I Want 3 live next week, next Thursday at the H2O Wrestling Center in Williamstown, New Jersey. A highly anticipated event set to showcase the best in independent wrestling. Marcus Mathers, again, we've said it on the show a bunch of times. He is one of those names that is the future of this industry. And if he's already booking shows like this already, he's got a hell of a future ahead of him. Sam Holloway is going to wrestle Cruel.
Yeah, I saw that. That's going to be a lot of meat.
No bread, no water.
No. Not at all. That was good. I like that.
Hey, that's what I'm here for. Yeah. I like it. I do think that it is time to introduce our guest. I think that everybody's had enough of me talking, and the podcast dad certainly has. But tonight we are incredibly excited to be joining Kevin McElvaney, editor-in-chief and archive manager, of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. He's a seasoned journalist who plays a pivotal role in shaping the landscape of professional wrestling coverage. Last week, PWI dropped the much-anticipated annual PWI 500, the top 500 wrestlers from around the world, and is making waves and conversations as always. And we are super proud to say that 13 of those wrestlers on that list were former guests on our show. So let's dive into the impact of this list. Without further ado, let's welcome Kevin McElvaney to the stage. Kevin, thank you so much. Welcome to Wrestling Junkies. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry I missed the memo about the uniform that I was supposed to wear here tonight.
It's okay. We'll send you a shirt. Don't worry.
All right.
That'll be for next time.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But Kevin, let's get right on into it. We have a lot to cover here. We know we're going to talk a lot about the PWI 500, but we're gonna take it back a little bit. When we look at the world of professional wrestling here at the Wrestling Junkies, we look at wrestlers. They are superheroes, supervillains that clash. They all have origin stories. You're in the industry as well, so we're just going to ask you, Kevin, tell us about some of your earliest memories of pro wrestling.
So my earliest memory of pro wrestling was WWF Superstars, circa 1990, June, around there. Would watch my Saturday morning cartoons every week on the local UHF station. And the 1 week I did not, this is back in the, didn't have a remote necessarily on every TV. And didn't get up quick enough to change the channel. And I thought, like, this weird show that comes on after cartoons, I guess I'm going to watch it. And I was very young, and I was hooked just almost right away. Went out, rented every wrestling VHS tape at Blockbuster multiple times. Watched the then current WWF product. And then eventually someone told me, there's other wrestling out there. What? And started watching WCW, started reading various wrestling magazines, including the one I edit now. Basically that taught me about even more wrestling. And then I was going out and, I'm too young to be doing tape trading and stuff like this, but I was going out and, Kmart has like an off-brand wrestling tape that has people's matches before they were in the WWF, before they were in WCW. I'm going to check that out. And of course that's territorial wrestling. And I got an early exposure to that. From the wrestling magazines and then, from those tapes. So that's like the base level intro for me.
Yeah. Who were some of your favorites growing up?
Well, my favorite doesn't age so well now, but my favorite was Hulk Hogan growing up. He's not such a proud Hulkamaniac these days, but
okay.
He was him, Ultimate Warrior as well. Sting was my favorite WCW guy. This is, Surfer Sting, that era. I'd say those are probably my big three. And I'm a big fan of the Rockers on the tag team side of things. So
love it. So tell us about your introduction to journalism as a whole. What led you to this field?
Yeah, I mean, I always, as I said, I was reading those wrestling magazines as a kid. I was, reading anything I could get my hands on, books, magazines. I always wanted to work in writing. It was just the question of what I wanted to write. Went to school, studied it, got out of school. My first real published clip was with The Wrestler / Inside Wrestling, which is a sister magazine to PWI. And that was kind of a funny story because I was just, working at Wawa, which is our regional chain / convenience store / deli. Shout out to Wawa. And looking for a full-time job and, submitting my work at various places. I applied for a proofreading job at what turned out to be Kappa Publishing. But it said, if you know wrestling or are interested in wrestling, it's a plus. I get an email back like a day after applying to this from Stu Sachs. And he says, the position was filled. Well, I don't know why the position was still up, but it had been filled, but happy to keep you in mind for freelance writing if you're interested. And then he asked how familiar I was with the magazines. And, that was the beginning of it. That was like just a few months out of college and certainly wasn't doing full-time writing at that point. I mean, I was a very occasional contributor throughout the years. At some points I would contribute much more. And then, eventually became more and more involved with the magazine, was on the 500 committee. And then, when Stu Sachs was retiring, he asked if I had any interest in potentially succeeding him. And I came up and I had to interview with his boss. I had to come up and, present to the entire company basically. So it wasn't just me being anointed by Stu to take over for him. But yeah, that's the short-ish version of it.
So, and I may be going way out of order for these beautiful notes that Eric typed, but being on the 500 committee, what is that process like? Like, do you Are you sitting there ranking all 500 like as your own ballot, or how does that look? Or what does that look like?
It's a group effort. So it starts out, we certainly do a lot of research ahead of time, and most of us will come in with a top 10 or top 20 of our own, but it's not, hey, we're going to take all of these and then do a mathematical average of them. No, we're going to discuss and weigh the pros and cons. And then some of us come in with an idea that this person or that person will rank very well. And then after talking it through with the group, like, oh yeah, maybe they don't hit the criteria as well as I thought they did. So it really is, I think any one of us could go and make a separate list and it would look different for this. And I include myself in that, even though I technically have the veto power and I can change it because of just solely by being the last person to edit everything. If I made the list by myself, it would look very different, so it's just, we have our committee members who've been, some have been with the magazine longer than others, but all of them are just incredibly sharp, smart people with a great perspective on pro wrestling. And yeah, we get together and we hash it out. We usually do the top, say top 100 or so the first meeting, and then we'll have a second meeting, and then usually someone will go off and kind of work on the back half of the list separately. For many years that was Dan Murphy, and then he retired from PWI, so it was no longer him. So yeah, even then the list is not, okay, this last person just looked at it and that's that. It comes back in. Who did I miss? What looks wrong? What looks, oh, this person should be shifted up a little bit. There's a lot of checking, double checking, many cooks in the kitchen. But that's why it is what it is. And, it's certain, when I say many, we're talking about still less than 10, fewer than 10, but like, if you have a larger publication, you have a Rolling Stone doing the top 500 albums, they have a lot more people working on something like that. And they have people, they're just doing that. So, it can be a thankless gig at times, but it's also, it's fun and it's a responsibility at the same time. So we do take it seriously, while having a little bit of fun with it. But yeah, I hope that answered the question. That was a little circuitous the way I just went about that, but
that was all good. Everything sounded great.
Cool. All right.
And I know that you said that, you're kind of that final check, being editor in chief, but, even, let's just, looking at this year's list, was there still anything that was a pleasant surprise to you, even, as you finished this list, as far as anything that stands out to you in the preparation?
I think, that's a good question. Is there anything that is a surprise? No, I will say I thought Gunther was going to be, I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise. I thought Gunther was going to be ranked a little higher. Mm-hmm. He had not won the World Heavyweight Championship as of the end of this evaluation period. So, that happened while we were creating the issue. It was after the period that we evaluate for, so it wouldn't have counted anyway. But something told me he would just be ranked pretty highly because he was top 5 last year. And then somebody made a case for a couple of other wrestlers, and one of them being Damian Priest. And we looked at Damian Priest's year, and, I don't think too many people would have pegged him as being, champion and a top star even a couple of years ago in WWE. And it's nothing against him. It's just not how he was being slotted into things. But then that very much changed with the Judgment Day, and then it changed with him being, Senor Money in the Bank, and then he cashes in, and then he has a decent reign as champion, and then after that he remains a pretty big star. So that was deserving, and it was surprised. Again, I would not have called that a year ago.
And I don't want to say any heated arguments, but have there been like some spirited debates on any of the 500 that you've done, where it's like there's the top 5, top 10, whatever? Have you had any of those examples? And like, how does that usually play out?
Oh yeah, for sure. We were back and forth pretty heavily on last year's list, which ended up with Seth Rollins in the number 1 position, Roman Reigns at number 2. And there was really a fierce debate back and forth about, one of our criteria is activity, and you have to be in there like doing the matches. And Roman was already kind of on his part-time schedule, not so much as this year. but last year he was beginning his part-time role, and there was a debate about, okay, yeah, Roman is a bigger deal as champion than Seth, but Seth is the one who's out there being the champion's champion. He's going around defending it everywhere, and it really did get a little bit not heated, because I mean we're not, there's no ill will between us, but yeah, you get really impassioned arguments. By the way, a fun fact with that, it ended up with the former members of the Shield in the top 3. That was not intentional. That was something that sounds like BS, but it's true. We got the top 5 into order, and as we are working on number 6, I think it was Brian Solomon points out, like, oh my gosh, look at number 3, and look at number 2, and look at the top 3. I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, that is all right. That's what we're doing, and
yeah.
It felt good to us, but yeah.
I mean, I can't disagree with it from last year. That way,
yeah.
All 3 of them did. I mean, you want to talk about a group that's really like just defied their legacy right there. That's like Mr. Cincinnati. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I want to ask you about people who are mentioned in, as far as the people that make the list, some of the notable opponents that they have throughout the year. And I happen to come across this tweet from Darius. His biggest achievement is having his name mentioned in so many any wrestlers' bios, because we've had memorable matches and moments somewhere around the globe. So, how do you feel that, or how do you view that impact of wrestlers who are mentioned so often? And how does that look for their future rankings down the line to you?
Yeah, so Doris is one who comes up a lot. Kevin Blackwood is someone who came up a lot as well. These are by and large wrestlers who get out and are world travelers. They're wrestling all over the place. They're putting in the work. Usually it's the reason they're getting booked all over the place is that it's very compelling, exciting in-ring work. Doris is awesome. He's been killing it for a few years now. And I mean, he was over in the US a few times. He was here over WrestleMania weekend. Actually worked on a show that I promoted over WrestleMania weekend. But yeah, I think it's up to them how far they can go. I mean, it's just really, it can be a little bit difficult when you're going that independent route, because, if you're not really aiming toward a contract, or if you're not settling into a contract, or maybe in some cases, maybe not even being offered, it's tough to say. A contract, it'll be hard. Like, your ceiling is going to be only so high for the 500 list. That doesn't mean you can't have a great career. It doesn't mean you can't be an all-time great. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there've been, at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of people from, maybe their ceiling was Ring of Honor in its early days, but you're still going to look at them as an all-time great, Mm-hmm. So that's not a knock, but I do think generally, what this does is, when someone is out there having these great matches with all these different people, it gets the attention in these different promotions. And if that wrestler is willing, I think it's just a matter of time before the contracts come calling. And then from there, the television time, the major championships, the superstardom.
So let's continue down that path of kind of the influence. What feedback have you heard from wrestlers who, maybe not, obviously not like the top 10, top 15, top 100, but kind of the, hey, I made it at 425. Have you heard feedback from those wrestlers and kind of how that's affected their careers?
Yeah, there's, in general, it's a pretty big deal when someone ranks for the first time. And that's not me patting us on the back. That's what wrestlers have told us time and time and time again. And, the last couple of years, especially, you'll see where people will be tweeting about it, posting on Instagram, on Facebook, what have you. So it's not exactly a secret. It's kind of like a level to making it, is having this cachet to be on this list that's existed for, 3.5 decades now. So we've definitely heard that. We don't usually get too much feedback on the actual number. That's people, unless people, if someone jumps a surprising amount, or they're surprised how high they'll rank, they'll comment on that. But it won't be, oh, I'm for this. Why am I not 300? It happens, but it's rare. But in general, when you see people, especially in that range, and especially if it's their first or second time ranking, they're very happy, because it means they're getting some kind of momentum and they're being recognized.
Sure. And I want to get your thoughts. This is a quote from Cody Rhodes. I'm not a wrestler who pretends like the number doesn't matter. That's how you can spot a liar right away. If they tweet, nobody cares about their number on this list. We all care. I just want to get your reaction to that sentiment that Cody, it's obviously, coming from the number one on the list here. But do you think that's a common theme running through the minds of people that do make this list?
It's tough for me to say that for sure, but I would kind of, even if they're not expressing it, I would defer to Cody here. I mean, he's the top star in the industry. And then on top of that, you have, like, he's been outspoken in the past. Like, he thought he should have been number one multiple times before this. And that was actually something that came up during his interview and was discussed. It was Cody and Al Castle, our senior writer, who spoke with him. But he's definitely, like, locked in on that. And that was something that he wanted to achieve. And then he finally achieved it. And we can argue about whether it's overdue or not, but I think very, very well deserved this year. And I think a lot of other people, I want to say the New Day might have discussed this on some kind of social media video, or maybe it was, The Bump or something like that. But they were talking a few years back about kind of like nobody cares about their number until they're very happy about their number. Like it's then you put it over like, oh, I'm number one. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. And yeah, that's it's pretty cool. It's again, it's not the be all end all. One thing I brought up in my column in the issue is you have Roman Reigns, who, I mean, you can make an argument at this point, certainly that Cody Rhodes is the bigger draw, bigger star. How that bears out in terms of TV ratings, things like that, that's a little bit trickier, but certainly like on the road, bringing the fans in consistently, Cody Rhodes, huge. But certainly neck and neck with him, Roman Reigns. However, Roman Reigns is not on the list. Roman Reigns is not on the list because he didn't have enough matches this year. So we have a minimum match requirement. This is, dating back to, we had situations where I think Brock Lesnar had like 2 matches one year, but he was champion. Like that's it. Yeah. It feels wrong to slot someone like that ahead of people who are working all the time. So there's a very relatively low bar to clear for this. And Roman was taking deserved time at home, and that's, I think that's great that he did that. And family is incredibly important. So he made the right choice, no doubt about it. And it doesn't make him any less of a star, but for the purposes of our list, we're not saying he's less of a star. We're just saying, oh yeah, it's a technicality. It would be like if you think about like in, baseball season right now, if someone misses the trade deadline and they can't play in the playoffs, it's not that they're not good enough to play in the playoffs. It's just that they weren't playing for the team during the right part of the season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Acknowledged. I saw that.
Yes, we got a lot of Roman fans. So your role, you've covered a ton of memorable moments in wrestling history so far. Is there any particular interviews or events that you're just blown away? Like, I got to do that.
Man, that's a tough one. This was one another writer was slotted to do it and couldn't last minute. The first time Bianca Belair was on the cover and she was like on the way up. And I think this is right before she won the championship at WrestleMania. Spoke with her and just how humbled she was by being on the cover of the magazine, by being in the position she was in at WrestleMania, even though she has, every right to not be humble because she was killing it. But she was kind of getting to talk to her at that moment. And then she wins the championship. She's on the cover of the magazine. And then that's what we're putting out in the world. That just popped into my head as something that I'm very happy and grateful that I got to do. There's plenty of other interviews that I've really enjoyed. This isn't, the same tier of like a historic event in wrestling, but I spoke to Shazza McKenzie earlier this year, and Shazza McKenzie has this incredible story of coming and betting on herself and being a native Australian who moves herself to the U.S., gets incredibly is able to obtain a work visa as an independent wrestler. That never happens. And just, has been doing great. The fact that she told her story with all its vulnerability, with all, like leaving a marriage behind, leaving her home behind to come bet on herself and do this. The fact that people will, trust me with those stories, that's huge. And I'm happy to do that every single time. So those really stick out in my mind just as much as some of these bigger interviews, but there've been a lot of highlights.
Awesome. Let's talk about the future, not just of pro wrestling, but the PWI 500 as a whole. I think you did an interview last week with our friends at Between Two Beards. Shout out to JPJ and Pluggo. And you had noted that it's your hope to see more diversity in the list. Swerve made it to number 2, and it's the highest, I think, ranking that we've seen for an African American since The Rock. I mean, we're going back over 20 years. What do you think that can be done to further help celebrate the diversity that we're seeing in pro wrestling, and making sure that that's also reflected in the PWI 500?
So, I mean, there's a couple of things there. The one is, I hear on one hand where it might sound like, okay, like we've never had a black wrestler ranked number 1 in the 500. We have in the women's ranking, Bianca Belair as an example, Awesome Kong years ago. But for us to say, oh, well, it's reflective of the industry and what's going on that year, which is true. We want it to accurately reflect the criteria. And a lot of that does come down to how strongly people are pushed, how well they're booked. But I still get where sometimes it can kind of sound like, when the president tweets and like, we need to do something about this problem. It's like, well, you're the president, do something about it,
Yeah.
But the other side of that is, we don't want it to look like a situation where we're forcing it, where we have the wrong person as number 1. Same thing like any other milestone when we have a wrestler from, like AEW existed, and if it wasn't the right call for Jon Moxley to be number 1, we wouldn't have done it. Even though it's a great news story to have Jon Moxley as number 1 and anointing this new company, but you got to make sure it's the right person who ticks all the boxes. Specifically, someone like Swerve Strickland, I think, in almost any other year would have been number 1, but Cody Rhodes just like absolutely slayed every single criteria that we have. So I think that's something that has to come kind of from the bookers themselves, from the promoters. That's part of it. But there are ways that we can do better. And we've specifically looked at that over the years. The year before I started as editor, there was a lot of backlash against the 500 for being like a very undiverse list, specifically a very white list. And one of the people who was most critical of us is Righteous Reg. And he, of course, has the BW 500 that he does, which is his ranking of the top 500 black wrestlers in the world. So Reg is someone who I started talking to amidst all that. And, eventually it led to him being part of the committee and being, contributing to the magazine, writing a column, which is awesome. But what he did, he put wrestlers on our radar who were just simply not before. And I think a lot of it was, maybe it was just regions we weren't covering as well. Like there were wrestlers in certain, like St. Louis, we weren't covering St. Louis very well. And there were wrestlers in St. Louis black wrestlers winning championships should have been on the list. We're not. It wasn't an intentional omission, but it ends up looking, like not just a regional bias, but it ends up looking like a racial bias. So certainly we don't want that to happen. We want the right people to be ranked, and we want to have an inclusive list, again, based off of what is actually going on in the industry. And we want to celebrate that and have a list that, people can look and see, this person looks like me, they're doing well. I could do the same thing. I could do this in wrestling. I could do this in another field. I think that's amazing. But it does come from, promoters being willing to run with these wrestlers. And I think that's a huge thing. And I think we've seen more of that, especially because there are so many people who are great and wrestlers of color who are just undeniable. And that really does help.
So wrestling, as you know, goes through ebbs and flows, and I think right now
Sure
we're
does.
in a nice boom period where there is a ton of good wrestling. How hard is it to balance mainstream and independent wrestling with this list?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges for me is I'd love to do, and we're not going to do it because we have too many lists. I'd love to do a list of just all independent wrestlers, not at, specifically to lift up independent wrestlers, not to overlook anyone else. But it's my gut feeling that, we should be looking at people who are out there working every single week and every single weekend, and sometimes multiple matches, and doing this incredible work and traveling all over the world on their own dime sometimes. I think it's important not to say just because they aren't on television or they aren't consistently on television that they're inherently so much less than someone who's technically under contract but not really doing anything. Sure. Before I was editor, that was kind of the tack that was taken. Certainly there were a lot of independent wrestlers, but you had by default, well, this person's under WWE contract, and yeah, they lost all year, but they're under WWE contract. They're going to be ranked above this independent wrestler, unless it's like the top of the top independent wrestlers. And even then, like, it's got to be someone who, like, I don't know, a finalist in Battle of Los Angeles, and, maybe had, trying to think who would have, like in 2019, like maybe, like a Full Impact Pro or CZW championship or something, just like an established longer term promotion. But, I think that's a limited way of looking at it. You have to also give consideration to these true freelancers who are going all over the place and doing great work. And I think one really cool thing is that you do see this overlap now, not just in terms of like the so-called extra work or things in Ring of Honor, but you'll see people show up for Brief Runs in TNA. You'll see them show up in Japan, show up in Mexico. So I think the way the wrestling industry is functioning right now, as this, the forbidden doors being wide open, to use the cliche now, which, I mean, think about that. That was not a cliche a few years ago. And now this is how it is. The fact that swings open for unsigned wrestlers as well is pretty awesome.
Do you see any changes to the criteria? Now that we look at, partnerships between promotions, we're seeing a very fruitful NXT and TNA relationship, and we're seeing the impact that it's having on a Jordan Grace and a Joe Hendry, and even a renaissance of sorts for Zachary Wentz, who left WWE, not necessarily of his own accord, and all the things that happened with that. Especially as you look towards 2025 and kind of thinking about the plans, not just for the list, but PWI, what role does that play into the consideration of what you produce?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the criteria, I think we're already seeing some effect, slightly in the 500, but certainly it's going to show up in the women's 250 because we have a Jordan Grace who is defending her championship in two companies. You have the wrestlers who are on NXT, but they're also showing up in TNA to challenge her there. And that's going to have an impact in terms of the ranking. As far as the criteria changing, I mean, the criteria kind of is what it is. I mean, we have discussions about shifts and, like, do we loosen the activity requirements, things like that. But then you have people who are wrestling 100 matches. And to me, you want to recognize those people for doing what they're doing. But yeah, I think this interplay and people showing up in different places absolutely elevates those people, and it makes them more likely to rank higher on future lists, so long as they keep doing this.
Sure. I'm going to go back to the theme of the show, which is apparently evolution. The evolution of this list. How have you seen it throughout the years that you've been there, especially now with like the digital media era being so big and everybody wants it now? Like, how have you seen that kind of evolve throughout the years?
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially this whole list is visible within like an hour of it being, and I don't just mean visible in that you can go buy it, because the digital edition comes out, but it will be effectively like somebody will post it on a website within an hour, and then everyone will be sharing it. So it really becomes a situation of looking at how people consume all this, because, pushing the quality of the magazine, like even just using it as something like arguments. So I used to go, and I would do this under the PWI account too, and I would answer questions and explain why people are ranked certain ways. And like, you know what? Why don't you buy the magazine? Because it's all, and it doesn't have why is this person at this number versus this person. It doesn't have every single situation, but it does explain why the person had a great year, is ranked in that spot. Or in certain cases, if someone is ranked notably lower than the previous year, it'll note this person was out injured for a long time, or despite this, they still did this and this. So, it's part of, it's not just the list, it's the issue. It's shining a light on all these great wrestlers. I'm not sure that if that entirely answered your question, but it certainly affects the way that we promote this and market this. And it underlines the need for the digital edition, because as soon as people see who's number one, they want to know the top 10, they want to know the top 20, 50.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of, sorry, Eric, I'm going to double down on this question. It kind of is now being complemented by the PWI podcast, right? So how did you guys start that, and why did you think that was so important to get out there?
Yeah, so the podcast has been going since before I was editor. That was under Stu Sachs. Dan Murphy started it. Later on brought Al Castle on. Al Castle hosted solo for a while, and then Brian Solomon joined him. But the idea was, we have this magazine, and it comes out, at this point, it comes out around every 6 weeks as opposed to every 2 months. But when people are getting the magazine, they're getting, I would call it a little time capsule. It's some people are getting it and it's their news and they're not really dialed in other ways, but we're not really breaking news for the most part. We'll have insight, and we'll have looks into the real thoughts of wrestlers, and we'll have analysis that you aren't getting before that. But what you're not getting is the in the moment reflections on the news of the week. And that's what the PWI podcast goes and, fills in for that. And we have, notably we have very highly tenured writers from the magazine who are hosting this. We have them on there because effectively they're the face of the magazine. And I won't necessarily agree with everything Al says or Brian says, but I trust them to go out there and cover everything, with responsibility and tact, and to, do us proud, basically.
And Kevin, as we kind of, move towards the end of our conversation here, I just thought this was really cool that I found. So there's a wrestler by the name of Dustin Wilson. He was number 500 on the list about 2 years ago. And he is going to be releasing a documentary that was produced over the last 3 years about his time at number 500 on the list. So I do want to get your take on the significance of that 500 spot and its impact on people that do make the list. And then, what motivation can be had after seeing this documentary coming out for wrestlers that are aspiring to make this list and take advantage of the opportunities that maybe come with being included on such a list.
Yeah, so I was actually interviewed for that documentary, so I appear in it, and I was able to get a sneak peek of it as well. It's very compelling stuff, and he goes and he talks to other former 500 ranked wrestlers about the significance of the position. And it's usually the person who's number 500. A couple cases this wasn't necessarily what was going on, but usually it's someone who, not necessarily a gimmick, but they have something kind of colorful about them. They have something, a lot of cases, sort of silly, but it's something that resonates. It's not this person who's out there just doing something ludicrous that nobody cares about. It's someone who's gaining traction with that. And Dustin Wilson, Big Dust, was out there as a manager / wrestler. And I mean, he is in his role as a manager, and this is not to take anything away from him as a 500 ranked wrestler, but I mean, kind of reminds me of a Bobby Heenan in some ways. Just really contemptible, but he's very funny. You can't help but laugh at what he's doing, even if he's just being a total weasel, to use the term. But then you have situations where he's typically compelled to get into the ring. He doesn't necessarily want to get into the ring.
Yeah.
So you have someone like that at the number 500 spot, and someone very special who I think deserved that recognition. Last year was Andre Chase, and Andre Chase on NXT, just a very unique role, and not necessarily, he's been doing better as a tag team wrestler in recent years, but excellent wrestler. But he was, kind of like a silly position on the NXT roster. And at the same time, one that was like totally lovable and significant. And this year it's Blue Payne, who is, was wrestling as Blue Cane for a while, which was a controversial thing on the independent circuit, because it's essentially, it's a ripoff gimmick, but it's also kind of a nod to the ripoff shows that populated the UK throughout the 1990s. You had people just kind of wrestling as like Undertaker, but it was definitely not the Undertaker, or it would be someone named like Hawk Hogan or something like that. And he got a lot of traction from that. He feuded with Matt Cardona, had a match with him in GCW. So the people who are in that position, I don't want to say too much about this documentary that Dustin is the star of, but there is a line in there about something like, if you're not number 100, you want to be number 500, because that's, people kind of flip to the end of the list to see, well, who's on the other side of this? Who's that person? And it's usually someone who has a fun little story with them of some kind.
Good quote. I like that. Yeah. All right. So now we get to the really, really tough question. And this is a question we ask every guest. You are no different. So when you think Mr. WrestleMania, and neither of them are active, so we don't have to worry about that, Shawn Michaels or The Undertaker?
It's got to be The Undertaker, the streak. And I mean, obviously it fell apart with the loss and then another loss, and it didn't end maybe the way it could have, but just so many years he was synonymous with it. So I would have to go with Undertaker.
It's like 10. So I get 10 points right there.
Whatever. You won't hear any argument from me. Like I say, if as long as people can back it up, we certainly take it to heart, and we'll add it to the tally. But Kevin, thank you so very much for joining us tonight. Before we wrap up here, I know I think this might be the last issue of the year as far as the 500, but can you give us a glimpse into what we can expect in 2025?
Yeah, so actually it's dated December because that's a magazine convention, but it's not the last one that will be released this year. So we'll have digitally next month, we'll have the Women's 250 issue coming out. That hits newsstands in November. And then we will also have just before the end of the year, the issue that contains the Tag Team 100. So the women's issue that's coming up next has the awards ballot in it. I love the awards issue, even though, it comes out just into the new year. But one of the things I love the most about that is we get to declare winners and hand off plaques, but it's not us doing it. It is legitimately a fan vote, a reader vote. So when people get worked up over it and like, how do you like this magazine is a joke? I'm like, well, I literally just counted the votes. I don't know what to tell you. So, but that's always a fun issue. We have that coming out, early in 2025. So it's right now, you can go and you can subscribe. We have bundles and all sorts of cool stuff where you can get the issues digitally as they come out and then get it shipped to your door as well. And then you have that for your collection. So cool things ahead.
Yeah, I already signed up for my $10 digital subscription basically once that came out. So yeah, definitely looking forward to it. But Kevin, thank you so much again for joining us, and thank you to everybody that stopped by tonight. We will be back tomorrow with a brand new episode. Got a little bit to talk about regards to NXT, Monday Night Raw. I'll touch on SmackDown a little bit and some AEW coverage. But make sure that you're following at Junkies Pod for all things Wrestling Junkies Podcast. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at Wrestling Junkies Pod. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Choops, hit them with that magic number, please.
Just one. Tell one person, please.
That's all we ask. Tell one person that you think might enjoy our podcast. Share it with them. We're live 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Again, back with 2 more episodes this week. That's going to do it for us today. Kevin, just stick around for a quick second, but that's going to do it for us. So for Kevin McElvaney, for the podcast dad, and Mr. Cincinnati, this has been the Wrestling Junkies Podcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow night.